Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the MEDOUSES podcast, the show where we explore the feminine world in all its beautiful and wonderful shapes and forms. Moonlight has often been blamed for lunacy, that inexplicable condition whose very name derives from Latin luna, moon, directly linking frenzy to lunar influence. The moon governs change, the things that shift, flow, and renew themselves, without ever truly changing. What finer instrument for comprehending and ordering time? What finer emblem of feminine nature? There was a time when the ancient inhabitants of this planet looked up at the night sky, observing that something changed night by night and cyclically repeated itself. Thus, they began to become aware of a concept that was still embryonic and less atomically fragmented than today, yet meaningful and articulated: time. Every night, that pale orb in the sky changed its appearance, shrinking its full sphere until it disappeared completely, leaving the dark night sky dominated only by the stars. Yet then it reappeared, and with the opposite change, night after night, it grew larger and fuller until it once again occupied its entire spherical shape. Its changing presence was the first clue to the perception of the passing of time. In fact, lunar reckoning became the first measure of time. Moon after moon, that is, month after month, this celestial alternation was repeated, setting a well-defined temporal connotation and giving their union a broader framework in which to inscribe the dynamics of the succession of seasons. Though in rougher forms, accounting for time proved necessary for many reasons, not only to give meaning to a change, but also to the cycle of life and death. In 2007, an engraved ancient artifact was found near Rome, a simple pebble which probably served to calculate time by scanning the lunar cycles. This archaeological find presumably goes back to a period between the Paleolithic This archaeological find presumably goes back to a period between the Paleolithic and Bronze Ages and was created over time, demonstrating constant attention to the stars. Still, observation of the stars and natural phenomena gave rise to symbolic attributions that were not superstitious but rather hieratic, expressions of the profound connection that once united the sacred conception of nature with mankind, who still lived in symbiosis with it. In the dawn of humanity, it was therefore men and women themselves who were divine. In fact, in almost all primitive cultures, natural manifestations are transformed into divine principles with human connotations. And so, every natural divine element had a symbolic and inherent human connection. And vice versa. It is no coincidence that in many cultures the moon becomes the objective correlative of femininity, motherhood, and fertility. In contrast, the traditionally masculine solar symbolism encompasses the characteristics of action, virility, and strength. Keeping with this correspondence, the length of the lunar cycle approximates to female hormonal cycle, which is also characterized. The male one, on the other hand, lasts 24 hours and has peaks and drops that figuratively follow the path of the sun. It was easy, if not immediate, to grasp a natural similarity between women's menstrual cycles and lunar cycles, associating the new moon with the bleeding phase and the full moon with fertility. Similarly, the waxing moon was seen as a symbol of female gestation and maturation, while the waning moon reflected their decline. The moon's rhythm, steady yet slow, ever changing yet dependable in its constant return, became the foundation of sacred calendars among ancient peoples, who saw in it not only symbolic and hierophanic meaning, but also astronomical significance, with woman as its primary emblem in many cultures. Throughout Europe have been found small statuettes carved from stone, ivory, and bone, small Venuses with rounded, pregnant forms which embodied both female, more specifically maternal, and lunar symbolism. The Venus of Lausel, carved in rock, represents a pregnant woman holding a crescent moon with 13 notches engraved on it in her right hand, while her left hand points to her pregnant womb. All these symbolic details link the 13 days of the waxing moon to pregnancy. The Venus of the Spug, carved from mammoth ivory, also depicts a pregnant woman with ample breasts and wide hips, and, like the first Venus, there are 10 lines carved below her buttocks, corresponding to the moons of gestation. There are many others that depict the image of the sacred mother goddess, a primal and generative principle. This is why female deities associated with the moon, such as Diana, Isis, Hecate, Selene, Tanit, and Arianrod, are associated with nighttime protection, fertility, childbirth, and the cycle of death and rebirth. For a long time, therefore, the moon was humanity's primary reference for visualizing and concretizing the perception of the passing of time, as linguistic roots also evidenced. From the Indo-European me, which passed into Sanskrit as mami, came the Latin mensis, month, moon, and finally the term menstruation. Beyond its use as a temporal reference, which was later replaced by the solar calendar, for centuries the moon remained a symbol of the sacred feminine, of what happens in the darkness and in the depths. Just like all the changes that are part of female nature, it also becomes a symbol of introspection, of the unconscious, a receptive principle like the feminine one, and it is no coincidence that it also appears among the major arcana of tarot decks with the same meaning. Diaphanous, graceful, luminous, and surrounded by her shining handmaidens, the moon-like pallor is a characteristic feature of female depictions in many cultures. Male skin, on the other hand, is amber-colored and kissed by the sun. Not until later did the lunar reckoning begin to create difficulties. The lunar calendar, which was designed to mark sacred times, contrasted with solar calendars, which were more functional for civil and agricultural needs. The lack of reconciliation between the two systems made it difficult to calculate sowing times, as well as to organize civil time and work. While the lunar year, consisting of 12 full moons, had 354 days, the solar year had about 10 more. A discrepancy that had to be corrected approximately every 3 years by adding an extra month to the lunar calendar, making the two systems align again. All the attempts made to reconcile the two systems faced the feeling of an imperfect time, out of sync with the stars and beyond human control. It was ultimately decided to adopt the solar calendar and to retain the lunar calculation only for specific sacred and festive needs. That is how the perception of time must have changed. Gradually, men felt the need to standardize and make everything calculable, including time. In Europe, it was Julius Caesar and then his nephew Augustus who applied the solar reform to the existing calendar, definitively switching from the Greek lunar calendar to the solar calendar of 365 days, with months of 30 instead of 29 days, alternating with months of 31. But the calendar we use today is from an even later period and can be attributed to Gregory XIII, who was also responsible for making it universal. The scanning of time thus becomes more incisive and clearer, and the sun becomes the privileged indicator of its passing. Daytime hours, when the day was further divided into smaller units, became the time for activity and work, and night was only an interlude. Masculine and Christian principle of the sun is contrasted by its decline, a time associated with darkness and evil as well as witchcraft or sorcery. With the advent of hourly work and then industrialized work, the night ceased to be that sacred moment of introspection, dream, and intuition. It became instead a time of rest and waiting for the rebirth of the sun. It is no coincidence, then, that for thousands of years women have had no place in a world where even time holds a masculine declension that reflects all the traits of patriarchal societies. Time is an economically and quantitatively measurable unit, and not a unit that defines life itself. We could therefore aspire to recover and make our new own that archaic and instinctive symbolism and renew that ancient bond with that introspective, emotional, intuitive, mysterious, and unknown nature which, instead of illuminating and enveloping everything as sunlight does, infuses only a pale glow that emphasizes both light and shadow and shows everything from a magical and different perspective. It is difficult to say whether in ancient times women occupied a position of privilege within communities. It is certain that there were many cultures and traditions in which this was the case, but it was not a widespread structure. However, the symbolic and sacred energy attributed to women has somehow survived to the present day, and we are now unwitting witnesses and heirs to those same characteristics. These should not be denied or replaced, nor should they be taken as an excuse to subordinate the passive nature of women, an attribute that I will replace with receptive, active dichotomy. The moon, illuminated by the light of the sun, does not produce its own light, but reflects it, transforming it into a different glow, useful and necessary for observing reality from another perspective. Just as the sun and moon together define the rhythm of the days, so too do the masculine and feminine inhabit every individual above their external traits, and both are essential for realizing the unit.